Have you ever built something and then slowly watched it lose direction? Not because it wasn't good, but because it forgot what made it special. In 1997, Apple was that company. They were 90 days from running out of cash entirely. Revenue was falling, the product line was bloated, investors were losing patience, and inside the company, no one could clearly explain what Apple stood for anymore. The brand that once challenged IBM was struggling to challenge itself. But what happened next didn't just stabilize Apple, it rebuilt the company from the inside out. And by the end of this video, you'll understand the strategy that turned confusion into dominance, and how you can apply it to your own life. To understand the collapse, you have to understand the original identity. In 1976, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak built the Apple I in a garage. It wasn't just a computer, it was a statement, a rejection of the corporate machine. By 1984, Apple launched the Macintosh, and during the Super Bowl, they aired a commercial attacking conformity. 1984 won't be like 1984. It wasn't marketing, it was positioning. Apple wasn't selling computers, it was selling rebellion. And for a moment, it worked. But success creates pressure, and pressure exposes cracks. In 1985, Steve Jobs was forced out of the company he co-founded. What followed wasn't an immediate collapse, it was something worse: drift. Throughout the early 1990s, Apple released product after product, different models, different configurations, no clarity. Market share declined as Microsoft Windows became the standard. Developers shifted focus, consumers followed convenience. And here's what most people miss. Apple didn't struggle because it stopped innovating. It struggled because it stopped focusing. Without focus, identity dissolves. And without identity, every new product feels random. By 1996, Apple had lost over $1 billion in a single year. Leadership turnover increased, strategy shifted quarterly, confidence evaporated. And by 1997, the runway was almost gone. That's not drama, that's math. But here's what the documentaries miss. When Steve Jobs was forced out in 1985, Apple didn't just lose a CEO, they lost their interpreter. Jobs was the only one who could look at a circuit board and see a feeling, who could walk into a room of engineers and say, "That's not good enough," and make them believe it. Without him, the company had brilliant people, but no one who could translate brilliance into clarity. Without an interpreter, complexity multiplied. So they did what scared companies always do. They covered the silence with noise. Look at this collection: Performa, Quadra, Power Macintosh, 60 products, 60 different stories that nobody asked for. Here's the test. Try explaining the difference between a Quadra and a Performa to someone you love. You can't. And neither could Apple's own sales team. While Microsoft was telling the world exactly what Windows was for, Apple was running a computer store that felt like a flea market. Piles of options, none of them connected, all of them forgettable. And forgettable is the only mistake you can't recover from. When Jobs returned in 1997, he didn't announce a restructuring. He performed an intervention. He walked into the engineering lab, looked at rows of prototype computers, and started removing projects in real time. Not this, not this, not this. 70% of the product line gone in weeks.
When you think about focusing, right? You think, well, focusing is saying yes, no. Focusing is about saying no. And you've got to say no, no, no. And when you say no, you piss off people. And they go talk to the San Jose Mercury and they write a shitty article about you.
Imagine being the engineer who spent 2 years building something, missing family dinners, believing in the work, only to see it canceled in a hallway conversation. Imagine being the executive whose entire division just evaporated. The room was furious. The board was terrified. The press called it corporate self-sabotage. But Jobs had seen something they hadn't. Every product they kept was a distraction, stealing attention from the one product that could save them. Instead of dozens of confusing machines, Apple reduced its strategy to 4 quadrants: consumer and professional, desktop and portable.
But 10 years later, When we were designing the first Macintosh computer, it all came back to me. Beneath it were the words, "Stay hungry, stay foolish."
And then, in 1998, something appeared that made no sense on paper. The iMac wasn't beige, it wasn't modular, it wasn't even particularly fast. It was blue, translucent blue. You could see the circuits inside. Jonathan Ive, Apple's lead designer, had fought for this color for months. The manufacturing team said it was impossible. The cost accountant said it was wasteful. The sales team said professionals would never buy a computer that looked like a toy. Ive kept a prototype in his office. Every time someone said no, he would hand them the blue machine and ask, "Does this make you feel anything?" It did. And that feeling became the point. The industry dismissed it. "Real computers don't look like this," they said. But Jobs wasn't selling to the industry. He was selling to the person who walked into a store and felt intimidated by technology. The parent who didn't care about megahertz. The student who just wanted something that felt human. And the market responded. 6 million units in 18 months. Not because it was the best computer, because it was the clearest computer. And in a world of noise, clarity is a competitive advantage.
That's a very limited life. Life can be much broader once you discover one simple fact, and that is everything around you that you call life was made up by people that were no smarter than you.
Clarity had saved the brand, but could it expand it? The real test came in 2001. MP3 players existed. They were clunky, ugly, and held about 12 songs. The market was stagnant. Jobs didn't ask his team, "How do we build a better MP3 player?" He asked, "How do we make 1,000 songs feel inevitable?" Not storage capacity, in your pocket. 5 words that didn't describe technology. They described possibility. And possibility spreads faster than specifications ever will. But that was just the warm-up. By 2007, Apple had $18 billion in cash. They could have played it safe. Instead, Jobs committed everything to a phone. Not because the market needed another phone. The market was saturated. Nokia owned 40% of the world. BlackBerry was the status symbol. The phone wars were supposedly over. And that's where most companies would compromise. The iPhone refused to choose. They were either smart and ugly, or beautiful and limited. Business or consumer. Keyboard or touchscreen. The iPhone refused the compromise, and that refusal almost broke the company. The screen cracked during internal demos. The software crashed repeatedly. AT&T nearly withdrew support 48 hours before launch. One engineer described those months as building a plane while the ground is rushing toward you. But when Jobs touched that screen in the final rehearsal and flicked through photos with his finger, the room went silent. Not because it was new, because it was obvious. And obvious is the most valuable real estate in business. It's the difference between convincing someone and showing them what they already wanted. The iPhone wasn't the final destination, it was the invitation.
And I think we ought to spend 100% of our time thinking about that. And if we can't do that, then we ought to go broke.
Hardware, software, services, retail. Each piece designed to make the next piece necessary. Not better, necessary. You don't buy an iPhone, you enter a system. And systems have gravity. Apple wasn't building products anymore. They were building momentum. And momentum is how you build a $3 trillion company without asking people to think too hard about the price. So by 2010, Apple introduced the iPad. Critics laughed. They called it unnecessary. But Apple wasn't trying to impress critics. It was expanding the system. Devices, operating systems, distribution, physical stores, a closed loop. And once you step into that loop, leaving doesn't feel impossible. It just feels inconvenient. That wasn't accidental. It was strategic architecture. Apple stopped asking, "What else can we build?" and started asking, "What deserves to exist?" Fewer products, higher standards, total integration. While competitors chased volume, Apple chased coherence. And coherence builds trust. Trust builds pricing power. Pricing power builds dominance. By 2011, Apple passed ExxonMobil as the most valuable public company in the world. In 2018, it became the first US company to reach a $1 trillion valuation. In 2022, it crossed $3 trillion. But here's what that number actually represents. It means the strategy worked, not the technology, not the marketing, the elimination. The willingness to remove what was good to protect what was essential. The discipline to say no 1,000 times for every yes.
You know, we try to hire really smart people, but we have a very simple organization, and we try to focus and do very few things well. And focusing's hard because focusing doesn't mean saying yes, it means saying no. So we decide not to do a lot of things so we can focus on a few handfuls of things and do them well.
And this is where the story stops being about Apple. Look at your own life, your projects, your calendar. Where are you overextended? What are you maintaining that you should be releasing? Because Apple didn't win by being everything to everyone. They won by being uncomfortably specific. And next week, we go inside the mind of the man who made those choices. The meetings where executives argued, the board members who wanted him removed, and the single question he asked before approving any project. Should this exist? Not, can we sell it? Not, will it make money? Should this exist? That's the filter. And that's how Apple turned focus into inevitability.